have a good time. Enjoy life. It's life is too short to get bogged down, to be discouraged, or you have to keep moving. You have to keep going. Put one foot in front of the other, smile, and just keep on rolling.
The thing is, with this show, I wanted it to be basketball only. I wanted to avoid politics and other sports as best as I can. Now, the irony of this is when Kobe passed away, it just didn't feel right to talk purely about his basketball accomplishments. You know, we know the resume. We know the 5 championships. We know the 2 gold medals. We know the scoring titles. We know the All-NBA and all defensive team selections. We know the game winners. You know, we know all the moments. We know from being drafted as a lottery pick by the Hornets and then being traded, and then being an All-Star game starter in his second season. We know about the three-peat, obviously, with Shaq. And then carrying the Lakers by himself back to the promised land after Shaq left, to winning 2 more titles. We know all of that. But he was more than that. He was an icon. And it's important to distinguish that as well, to try and get some context. You know, the NBA always breeds out superstars, and that's how their marketing is driven, right? Kobe was a real icon. He was our icon. He was our John Lennon. He was our Robin Williams. He was our Prince. And just like all of those guys passing away, this was a transcendent moment in history. Just like people ask, where were you when man first walked on the moon? Or where were you when Pearl Harbor was attacked? Or where were you when September 11 happened? People will ask this question, what were you doing when you heard about Kobe passing away? God, that's hard to say. This is, without a doubt, the saddest day in the history of the NBA. He was the most loved NBA player of all time. And that might seem, you know, is this emotion talking? I don't think it's emotion talking. Look at how revered he was. And I'll get to this later, but how revered he was when, you know, during his final season in the league. And you know, the Lakers weren't very good. We all know that at that point. But every game was a sellout around the league because people wanted to pay respect. The organizations during Kobe's final seasons, the organizations that were that were his rivals, that he had broke the hearts of, you know, whether it was Boston or whether it was Sacramento or San Antonio, New York, Detroit, Portland, Denver, you name any of the teams that he eviscerated, even Philly. And this is even before that. When Kobe got to 30,000 points, that was in Philly. I remember watching that game in Philly, and it was special. It was a special moment. The respect was so intense because all the fans, right? All the fans they loved him so much, and the cheers were loudest for him, even more than the stars of their team. That respect was real, and it was so big that it turned that hate into love. And the love was never stronger than in Los Angeles. Kobe dying, it's like the Hollywood sign falling over. All the beaches drying up. All the Walk of Fame being torn up. All the Santa Monica Pier, you know, falling into the ocean. Kobe is as synonymous with Los Angeles as anyone else that has ever lived. and that's irrelevant of their craft. It could be music, it could be acting, sports, whatever. Nobody, and I mean this, nobody has been more beloved in Los Angeles than Kobe. And that respect is worldwide. He has statues in China. This podcast, obviously, you know where I'm from. But this podcast was never the same after Kobe retired. And quite honestly, the NBA hasn't been the same either. And a lot of people's lives won't be the same after this. Sure, life will go on. It always does. That's just how things work, But for some people, he was their role model, and he was their inspiration. His determination to succeed was an excellent lesson that he passed on to all, and he used basketball as a tool to pass on that lesson. And even after basketball, we were all worried. We were all worried how he was going to adjust after basketball, and because he wouldn't have basketball as an outlet. He did wonderfully though, and he showed us how to be a good father, a great father to his children. That whole Mamba mentality, is marketing, but there's something to it, and that's why it took off. And it took off because it wasn't exclusive to basketball. It could be applied to all areas of life, because at its core, it was about dedication and determination. And because of that, he will live on with an entire generation. Now, that is one hell of a legacy to leave behind. But there is one thing I do want to talk about in regards to Kobe's on-court legacy. And I sort of touched on the last one. I'm not sure. I haven't heard the last episode I did. I was probably in a little bit of shock. But I know I sort of half touched on it. I've definitely talked about it in the past. And that's how the NBA has evolved. Basketball has evolved. It's a relatively new sport. It's a young sport. Not a new sport. It's a young sport, right? So we kind of have been spoilt as basketball fans in terms of the trajectory of greatness. We went from Russell to Chamberlain to Kareem to Magic and Bird, and then of course Jordan. So you saw a trajectory of greatness. Skills were getting better and better and better. And the play was getting better too. Then along came Kobe. And with all due respect to Shaq and Duncan, Kobe was the face of the league after Jordan. And after 3 rings before the age of 23, the expectation was placed on him to be better than Jordan. And quite honestly, at the age of 23, he was way ahead of what Jordan was. There was no attempt to bring Jordan's legacy down to make it easier for Kobe to achieve that standard, or to surpass that standard, excuse me. And yeah, it's true. Kobe didn't quite get to Jordan's level. But my God, did he get close. And as fans, we didn't care that he didn't get there. We didn't care about that. In fact, we loved that he actually had the balls to go out there and try to get there. He didn't look for any easy way out. He just wanted to earn it. We miss that competitive fire. And that's why an entire generation is mourning right now. The shocking thing is, about all of this, it's just so soon. It's just so soon. And as NBA fans, we've been very lucky when it comes to all-time greats not passing away. I talked about this on the David Stern tribute. How long... no, tomorrow is never guaranteed for anybody, yet we take it for granted. But when you look at the all-time greats, really the only all-time greats that have truly passed away, George Mikan and Wilt Chamberlain. But they had been retired for decades. Kobe was 41. That's just way too soon. And it's very hard to comprehend. And his daughter was only 13. I know there will be a statue at Staples for him in the future. But I really hope that statue is of him holding a ball or a championship trophy in one hand and his daughter with the other. You know, I've dealt with death far too much in my life, right? And I'm not isolated. Death is a part of life. You know, in Forrest Gump, when his mother's dying, and Forrest asks his mother, "Why is this happening?" And she goes, "It's just my time. It's just my time." And she says to Forrest, "Don't be afraid, as death is just a part of life." But one of the things I've learnt with dealing with death is the memories. Like you've got memories of certain people or whatever or animals, and when they pass away, it feels like you can't even look at a picture of them, and it's hard to even talk about them. But in due time, and there's no timetable for this either, the pain does go away, and you can start to appreciate those moments again. And some of the moments of Kobe, I know we're all hurting now, and I'm not ready to really talk about it, but maybe some of you are. So if I can help some of you guys just talk about some memories of Kobe, and sure, why not? And we all know about him being drafted by Charlotte. He didn't want to play for Charlotte. He wanted to play for Los Angeles under the advice from his agent. He told Charlotte that he didn't want to play for him, and Charlotte didn't want him. They had no use for him. Like, little known, the people think they forced that trade. No, that trade was predetermined. That was organized. If Kobe was still available, the Lakers were going to trade Divac for Kobe, and it wasn't just for Kobe. It was also to free up salary cap room so they could make a run at signing Shaq as well. The genius of Jerry West, huh? He made his way to LA. Broke his hand in preseason. Before preseason, in the off-season, excuse me. He was down at Venice Beach playing basketball in a pickup game. He broke his hand. And that, usually that will be a setback in of itself, but when you're a 17-year-old rookie, that really sets you back. Lakers tried to play him at point guard. I guess they had visions of him and Eddie Jones being in the backcourt together. And the Bulls had kind of set a precedent with this, as did the Orlando Magic, and ironically the Lakers too with Magic. But big backcourts did work back then. You could have Ron Harper and Jordan in the same backcourt. Both of those guys were 6'6". Penny Hardaway was 6'9". Nick Anderson was 6'6". So you could get away with that. But Kobe wasn't really a point. He definitely not at that stage of his career. So he was coming off the bench. He had his moments as a rookie. He won the slam dunk competition. He set the point scoring record during the rookie game, and this was when the rookie game was somewhat competitive too. So he had some moments, but he also had the air balls at the end. So think back to Utah. Utah was rolling at that stage. The Lakers were the preseason favorites. Right up there with the Houston Rockets actually. To make the NBA Finals. The Houston Rockets had just added Barkley, so they had Barkley, Olajuwon, and Drexler. The Lakers added Shaq. And but the Lakers were the 4 seed. They crushed Portland in the first round. I believe it was Portland in the first round. I'm pretty sure it was Portland in the first round. And They went up against the 64-win Utah Jazz. And despite what happened the year after, where they got swept and it was quite convincing, the game 3 was an emphatic victory for the Lakers. The first 2 games went to Utah, obviously. Game 3 was back at the Forum, and the Lakers had won emphatically. Game 4, Karl Malone had one of the greatest shooting performances of all time, which was a total comeback game for him because he had one of the worst ones in Game 3, and the Jazz won. But Game 5 was a close game, a very, very close game. The Jazz made some incredible shots down the stretch. Byron Russell, Jeff Hornacek were just pulling incredible shots, like, one-handed floaters whilst falling down over Shaq and stuff like that. Incredible shots. But Shaq fouled out. And instead of going to Nick Van Exel, who had a history of being a very clutch player and making game winners, Del Harris went to Kobe, and Kobe airballed 4 times down the stretch. And he... it was kind of seen as... you can look back at that moment as a defining moment, because we know now what Kobe turned out to be. But at that point, people were like, well, who is this guy? Airballing 4... He wasn't even hitting the rim with these shots. Now, fast forward to the preseason of the next year, and Kobe's had an entire injury-free off-season. He's added some muscle. And it's a game against the Washington Wizards in Las Vegas, I believe it was. And Kobe served up one of the most terrorizing facial dunks you'll ever see in your life, and maybe up against the best shot blocker in the history of the game since Bill Russell, in Ben Wallace. This was vicious. This wasn't an attempt where it hit the back of the rim and went, 15 feet into the stands like the ball. This was sick. This was unbelievable. I think at that point everyone realized, holy shit, who is this guy? And that was one of the early moments and then of course he had that game against Jordan in Chicago. Shaq wasn't playing. I don't think Pippen was playing either, to be fair. And Jordan and Bryant put on a show. Both of them went over 30 points. Kobe had a couple of nice dunks and made some shots on Jordan. And people were like, wow, we want to see this. Because it was kind of accepted that this was Jordan's last year. So they voted Kobe in on the back of that into the All-Star game to make sure that we would get an additional game, an additional matchup of Kobe versus Jordan. Then, of course, Jordan retired. Right, the Lakers didn't make it to the NBA Finals. They were served up pretty badly by the Jazz. They were swept quite embarrassingly. They did have an impressive win though against the Sonics prior to this, but changes needed to be made. The Bulls went on to win the title. Then Jordan retired. Then in the lockout year, Dennis Rodman was brought in, and that kind of derailed them. And then they brought in Phil Jackson the year after. And Kobe was the starter now. He was the starter the year prior. And Eddie Jones was traded away. Nick Van Exel's no longer on the team either. But brand new backcourt with Derek Fisher and Kobe Bryant. But Derek Fisher was now on the bench with Phil Jackson on the team. And they brought in Ron Harper. I mentioned him a second ago. And the Lakers ran right through the league. 67 wins. Shaq should have been the unanimous MVP. That's talked about quite a lot. But Shaq should have been the unanimous MVP. That was one of the greatest MVP years ever. Shaq terrorized that league that year. It was incredible. So dominant. Maybe the most dominant ever. And the Lakers looked unstoppable. But come playoff time, they looked very, very shaky. Sacramento nearly knocked them off in the first round. They were pushed to 5 games by the Sacramento Kings, which was the max. The 5th game was an elimination game. It was like a game 7. It was best out of 5 back then. And the Lakers survived. And then up against Phoenix, they rolled right through them pretty well. And Kobe hit a game winner, actually, in game 2 over Jason Kidd. And then up against Portland, Scottie Pippen was now on the Blazers. The Blazers were stacked. They were a very deep team. But the Blazers fell down 3-1, and Kobe had a big block at the end of Game 4 on Avita Sabonis. Sabonis actually went past Shaq on that play, gave him a little head fake and went by him, and there was Kobe protecting the front of the rim, and he blocked him. He saved that game, and they went up 3-1. But then the Blazers started to figure out the Lakers, and they won Game 5 at the Forum, and then Game 6 was never really in doubt. So we had a 7th game. And everyone knows what happens in that 7th game. We know the 15-point comeback by the Lakers, but the Lakers were playing so bad. They were lucky to only be down 15 points. And the reason they were only down 15 points was the play of Kobe. Shaq was withering. He's as much as I love Shaq, his play was very straightforward. If you had bodies that were willing to take the punishment, whether it was Dennis Rodman or Hakeem Olajuwon or whoever, Ben Wallace later on when they played the Pistons, you could slow down Shaq. And that's what the Blazers did. It was Kobe that kept them in that game. And it was Kobe was the reason they won that game. Otherwise, that would have been one of the great choking jobs of all time. And who knows what would have happened at that stage. They could have blown that team up at that point because they had brought in Phil Jackson and it still didn't work. Shaq might have been traded. I don't think they would have traded Kobe, but Shaq might have been the one to go. Anyway, the Lakers survived, and then they played Indiana. Indiana was a tough little team as well. Shaq was putting up huge numbers, but the rest of the team wasn't. And Kobe injured his ankle. Jalen Rose has admitted to purposely stepping underneath Kobe as Kobe was shooting a jump shot. And at the end of Game 2, the Lakers somehow won Game 2. It was very close. And they had a 2-0 lead. But back in Indiana, where they were very good at home, the Pacers were, I don't think they had actually lost at home in the playoffs at that point. They won Game 3. And then Game 4 is suddenly a big game. There's so much difference between being down 3-1 and 2-2. So the Lakers didn't want to give them any signs of life. So Kobe's back to play Game 4. He didn't play Game 3. And early on, he's looking pretty bad. He wasn't playing that good. But the Lakers were hanging in there. They were taking the Pacers' best shots. And Kobe's starting to get warmed up a little bit. And he's starting to play a little bit better, but the game goes into overtime. And Shaq, who had been very dominant in this series, fouled out. So when Shaq fouled out, what's going to happen here? Kobe's injured and the rest of the Lakers, like Glenn Rice, are not playing well. What's going to happen? And Kobe took the team on his shoulders and scored, I think it was 8 or 10 of their overtime points. And he's just going one-on-one with Reggie Miller and just torching him. Reggie Miller was doing pretty well, but Kobe just took that into his own hands. The dude was 21. Oh my goodness. Fast forward to the next season, and the whole Shaq Kobe, like obviously the Lakers go on and win the title. They win that game, go up 3-1, and they close the thing out in 6 back at Staples. The next season, there was all talk of this is the new dynasty, but Shaq and Kobe, they struggled to mesh. And the Lakers slipped to the number 2 seed. San Antonio was actually ahead of them. And Kobe was he was still young, obviously still young, and the focus wasn't like had he matured enough. Him and Shaq were going at each other. But come playoff time, this is a totally different team, and they stormed right through Portland, they stormed right through Sacramento, and they stormed right through San Antonio. And it was Shaq and Kobe looked unstoppable together. But then Game 1 of the NBA Finals, Allen Iverson lit up Kobe and Derek Fisher. Game 2, the Lakers barely won, and Iverson didn't have that good of a game. There were a lot of question marks about the Lakers at that point. Come Game 3, the Philly looked like they had the momentum, and they did, despite the Lakers being undefeated heading into the NBA Finals. Kobe, in a stretch, in the second quarter, coming back home, by the way, because that was home for him. Philadelphia is where he played high school. Took over. And essentially, I think that's what took the heart out of Philadelphia, was the fact that now Kobe was getting going along with Shaq's dominance. Then, of course, speaking of, they would go on to win that game. They would end up winning the next two in Philly. They swept Philly at home, and they would win the series in 5. They would go on to win the next championship. Then, of course, Shaq was out. Shaq was gone. He was traded, and Shaq and Kobe could have won 6 or 7 titles together. They really could have. But Kobe said he wanted Shaq gone because he wanted to prove that he could win without Shaq. Some people might hate that, but I love that mentality. I really do. Then you can talk about the 81-point game that he had. I mentioned it as being the greatest scoring game in NBA history. You might say, well, what about Wilt? Well, let me take it back. The greatest regular season scoring game. I think Jordan's 63 in Boston was the greatest playoff scoring performance because just the context associated with that. But 81 points, to me, was better than the 100-point game by Wilt for a couple of reasons. One, there's less possessions. 2, for Wilt, his own teammates were fouling the Knicks players so he could have more opportunities to score. So that kind of demeans it a little bit because he was getting more and more opportunities because they were actively fouling the Knicks. And so I would say Kobe's 81-point performance was the greatest regular season game of all time. And it was something very, very special. And the scary thing about it is, as fans, we weren't even all that surprised when he did it because he had scored 62 3/4 against the Mavericks. Had he had stayed in, he probably would have got maybe even more than 81 points. But fast forward that season, this is without Shaq. Pau Gasol hadn't been there, but he dragged them. He should have been MVP that year. And ironically, he went up against the league MVP in the first round in Steve Nash. Game 2, he dunked on Nash. It was one of the nastiest dunks I've ever seen in my life. It was right up there with the Ben Wallace one. And then when you apply the context of Nash getting the MVP over the top of him, when he didn't deserve it, it should have been Kobe. That's when the MVP really lost its value, in my opinion. In that series, though, the Lakers were clear underdogs. They were the 7th seed, the Suns were the 2 seed. But they were 1-1. Game 3, Kwame Brown actually had a hell of a game, and they won. But Kobe wasn't putting up huge numbers. He averaged 36 or 35 that season, which is incredible. But he wasn't putting up monster numbers in that because the Suns were trying to make everyone else beat them. But coming down the stretch of Game 4, the Suns actually had the lead. Kobe hit one shot to tie the game with milliseconds to go on the clock, and then of course he hit a game winner. He essentially hit 2 buzzer beaters to ensure they had a 3-1 lead. Incredible stuff. Really incredible stuff. And now we're sort of at the gold medal performance, which I think was his best game of his entire career. So they had now got Pau Gasol, the Lakers. They had made it all the way to the finals. They were the actual favourites up against the Boston Celtics. And Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce and Ray Allen. They lost the first 2 games of the series. They won Game 3 in a blowout, the Lakers. And then they were up by 25, 20... It was some insane number. I think it was 20-something points. And they somehow lost. I'll never forget that. That was the game that Ray Allen took Sasha Vujacic to the basket to seal that victory up. Now, that's why I'd never accept the Kendrick Perkins excuse, because of course they played in 2010, and, if Kendrick Perkins was around to get some of those rebounds, that maybe they would have won that Game 7 if you're the Boston Celtics. But I can't accept that excuse because if we go with that, then if Trevor Ariza was healthy, do you really think Trevor Ariza would have just... Ray Allen would have just blown right by Trevor Ariza the way he did Sasha Vujacic. Highly unlikely. But after that heartbreak, and then getting torn to shreds in Game 6 by Boston in Boston to lose the title, Kobe was on the Dream Team. Oh, well, no, excuse me, not the Dream Team, the Redeem Team. Excuse me, I had to catch myself there. And this was easily the best national team the US has put together since the 92 team. And you can make a pretty good argument that they may have actually been better than the 92 team. Now, I would still pick the 92 team, but based off the age of some of those players on the 92 team, Magic and Bird especially, you could really make an argument that the 2008 team was superior. And they may have actually won if they were to play in a 7-game series. And they were tearing up the competition. But Spain had emerged really as their primary threat to the gold medal. And coming down the stretch of that game, LeBron didn't really want to take the shots. Carmelo seemed capable of doing it, but he wasn't ready for that kind of a moment. Kobe led them. Kobe had one of the greatest 4-point plays in the history of basketball, and afterwards he just put his finger to the ground to the crowd to shush them, and he carried the US home, and it was a great moment for basketball. It was a great moment for American basketball, and I think that was his best game. I really do. Fast forward to, after that season, the Lakers rebounded. The Boston Celtics heading into the playoffs lost Kevin Garnett, and Dwight Howard was a fantastic player at that point, and he actually guided the Orlando Magic into the NBA Finals. They upset the Cavaliers, which kind of robbed us from a Kobe and LeBron matchup, but I think Kobe would have eviscerated him the same way that we saw Jordan tear up Clyde Drexler. There was a very different mentality between Kobe and LeBron at that stage of their careers, and I think it would have been a bloodbath. But what we saw was the Lakers win the title. They won the title back. The very next year, the Lakers were defending champs, and they were going up against the Phoenix Suns. And Phoenix had retooled a little bit. They brought in Grant Hill, and Grant Hill was a fantastic defender at that point. And down the stretch of Game 6 in Phoenix, Kobe hit shot after shot after shot. You could not defend better than what Grant Hill was defending. It was incredible to see some of these shots. And Alvin Gentry, who was the coach at the time, was just shaking his head. And Kobe was making these shots right in front of it. It was kind of like when Larry Bird went for his 60-point game. I think it might have actually been in New Orleans against the Hawks, because this is when you had territory games, right? And you saw the Hawks players just shaking their heads in disbelief as he was making the shots. That's kind of like what it was, but it was Game 6 of the NBA Conference Finals, and it was something to behold, and really, it solidified Kobe as being up there really with Jordan as being the only two guys that could really take over from that position, a guard position, in that kind of intensity and brilliance in pressure situations in the playoffs. We had never really seen that before. You saw stuff like Reggie Miller occasionally get hot like that, but not where he could actually dribble in it. Reggie still required someone to get the ball to him, whereas Kobe and Jordan, they didn't need that. And then Boston, the rematch. The Lakers had the home court. The Celtics, I think, were the 4 seed, and they stormed right through. They beat. They went through Dwayne Wade in the first round. They went through LeBron in the second round, and then they went through Dwight Howard in the third round. So they had gone through some of the best talent the NBA had to offer at that point. And here they were going up against Kobe, who was still the king of the NBA. at that stage. LeBron hadn't even won a title, so they didn't even go there. And Game 2, Ray Allen set a record for most threes in an NBA Finals game, and he was just hot. And the Celtics rode that to splitting the series at 1-1. Now the Celtics, they really felt that they could win all 3 games in Boston and close the title out. Game 3, though, Kobe along with Derek Fisher had other ideas. And their mental toughness got them that victory that they needed. And my goodness, did they need it, because games 4 and 5, it wasn't even really close. Kobe still delivered pretty well and put up big numbers in games 4 and 5 and kept them close. But had they lost game 3, then Boston was onto something. I'm pretty sure they would have won all 3 games had the Lakers not stolen that game or earned that game 3 victory. That would obviously propel the Lakers back home, where they would win Game 6 and then win Game 7. Kobe didn't have the greatest game from a shooting standpoint, but he played pretty damn well in the other areas. He hit the glass, 15 rebounds, played excellent defense, didn't allow Ray Allen to get it going. He bottled up Rajon Rondo, who was their best player at that time, and he was the MVP for the second straight NBA Finals. Then after that, the NBA landscape sort of changed dramatically, and we started to see the decline of the Lakers. But the last good moments we really saw from Kobe was with Mike D'Antoni as the coach. And they had brought in Dwight Howard, the guy that I just mentioned. Steve Nash was now on the team, although he was aging. You had Pau Gasol, you had Antoine Jameson. You had quite a few players there, but they were veterans. And speaking of veterans, Kobe was 35. There was one game I will never forget. I went to the casino in Sydney, and I can't remember what game they were showing. They were just showing the ESPN broadcast, and it was some crappy game. I can't remember what it was. But I had League Pass, and me and my mate, ironically, his name's Matty, we were getting bored, so we decided, let's check out the Laker game on our cell phones, or mobile phones, right? And the Lakers were down, and Kobe hit 3 threes, like unbelievable threes. Like, you couldn't believe how difficult, and the footwork that was required, and the balance, and the lower body strength to even get these shots up. And I'll never forget, Maddie and I were like high-fiving each other, and people were like looking around because they're thinking that we're watching the game that's on the projector. No, we were watching on... And it started actually getting people standing around us watching it on a little tiny mobile phone. And Kobe got into overtime with those threes. And he had one thunderous dunk in the overtime. And it was just special. You saw that, and it was just like, this is incredible. That season, he had like 3 game winners. He had the one on Dwayne Wade, and he hit one on against Sacramento, and I'm pretty sure he had another one. I can't remember what it was. Maybe I'm referring to those threes that he hit, but it was unbelievable what he was putting up that season. Unfortunately, that season he also tore his Achilles, and I thought this was maybe the most heroic thing I've seen on a sporting field or a sporting environment in my entire life. The Lakers were actually down. They were playing, and they were, despite all the talent, and despite how well Kobe was playing, they were very close to missing the playoffs. So every game down the stretch meant a lot. And he was carrying them, and this is up against Steph Curry. I'm not sure if Klay Thompson was on this team just yet. And you could sort of see this coming. Like, there was bound to be an injury. It's almost like the Derrick Rose situation, where people knew that he was being played way too much, and they were worried about him. And, yeah, disaster struck when he made his move to the basket. He just sort of fell down, and it was a bad call because the defender didn't do anything. He just fell over because he popped his Achilles. But nevertheless, it was a foul. And Kobe went to the foul line with a torn Achilles and made 2 foul shots, and then walked off the court. That is pure toughness. and this is coming from a rugby player, that is pure toughness. And it goes beyond toughness, it's pure pride as well. And pure love for what you're doing. And I thought at that point he should retire. You can't go out on a better high than that. And I would be proven wrong with that, because the next few seasons he was actually injured. He wasn't the same player. He was, most people, especially at that age, do not come back from Achilles injuries well. Even if you're younger, you don't usually come back from Achilles that well. And he came back though, and he was a shell of himself. And I remember thinking, I wish I was wrong with this, but I kept thinking he should have retired. He should have retired with the Achilles injury. He should have done it. But it's like he was building something up. And even though the Lakers were not anywhere near contention, it was a couple of seasons, right, after the Achilles. It was a very different team. He was actually playing forward on that team. Clarkson, D'Angelo Russell were playing in the backcourt. And then we've got a final game of the regular season. And this goes to show how much Kobe was loved as well. Final game of the regular season, you had the Golden State Warriors that had won 72 games. That was 72-9. If they win this final game up against Memphis, who had the ability to beat them, and it was actually, I think it was a close game. I never got around to watching it, but it looked like it was a 10-point game. If Golden State wins that game, they create history. That's the best regular season in NBA history. That's 73 wins, 9 losses. If they lose, it's tied with the Bulls at 72-10. There's a lot on the line there. No one cared. No one cared at all. Everyone cared about Kobe's final game. Everybody cared about it. And I was just thinking, I hope he doesn't go out there. And I would have been happy if someone said to me, make a deal with you, he goes out with 20 points. I'd be like, yeah, sure, that's great. I'll take that. Happily take that. Well, he didn't finish with 20. He didn't finish with 30. He didn't finish with 40. He finished with 60. And down the stretch, it was pure magic. It was unbelievable. I still can't believe that happened. For everything that Kobe accomplished throughout his career, outside of the gold medal game, I think that was his best game. Better than the 81 points, better than the 62 points, better than the championships, better than all of that. Better than the Game 7 against Portland, better than everything. The 40-point games up against San Antonio in the conference finals, better than every single game like that. 60 points at that age, considering where his body was at that point. I mean, he couldn't even dunk anymore. There were situations where he was driving to the basket and he was just laying it in. But still, he came up with 60 freaking points in his last game. The memories, man. Just the memories, huh? What a career. What a life.